Hello and welcome to this first in a new series of videos for this channel where I'll be touring charity shops and antique markets in different locations in a quest to find hidden retro treasures amongst the random vintage tat. I'm RetroSteveUK and today we're visiting the Brackley Antique Cellar in Northamptonshire. It's one of those central hub type marketplaces containing separate units individually run by lots of different dealers, so you're likely to come across all sorts of different vintage goodies from childhood toys to collectible war memorabilia. You can find out more about this place on their website, which I've linked to in the description. Starting from the main entrance, we're greeted by the King of Rock and Roll, who appears to be guarding those jewellery cabinets, and if you have a spare 950 quid lying around, you can take home this life-sized resin model of Elvis Presley. Making our way up the first aisle, past the entrance, you can see my lovely wife here on the right, and just around the corner here is an archway leading into the tea room, which serves freshly prepared baguettes and sandwiches as well as hot lunches, snacks, cakes and drinks. At the far end of the tea room there's a staircase leading up to what they call the interior room, which is normally host to a selection of gifts and household items. However, this seems to be in a state of flux at the moment as the shelves seem to be quite depleted, so I'm assuming they may be in the process of changing the dealers that trade up here. The one thing I did see of interest up here though was this fab looking storage tin, designed to look like a vintage record player. Unfortunately I didn't check to see what the price was, as I wasn't sure what I was going to be doing with this footage when I was recording it, so there may be a few more items coming up like this, which I apologise for, but in future I'm sure I'll have a better idea of what to film when I'm making these videos. Making our way back down the stairs, and you can see a second entrance to the tea room, leading out to the back end of the cellar. However, we're going to head back to where we came from and continue where we left off. Note the metal Lyons Maid sign down here on the right, and the various motoring collectibles and figurines. A few more metal signs as well, reproductions it has to be noted. However, they're still nice display pieces to add a bit of retro flair to your home. And apart from the other random knickknacks on display here, the one that stands out for me is this classic figure of the Michelin Man. I remember a lot of lorry drivers back in the late 70s having these attached to their cabs. This isn't one of those though, as it doesn't have the fixings, but he is standing on a neat tyre-shaped stand, so he could be stood pride of place on a display shelf or windowsill. The other side of the cabinet in this same unit has a mishmash of items, the two standouts for me being the somewhat politically incorrect Jim Crow style bust, and above that on the next shelf up the chocolate dispensing toy slot machine, which is a bit before my time but reminds me of the classic Cadbury dairy milk dispensers from the 1980s. A little cameo appearance here from me in that mirror, but the main attraction here is this vintage 1950s to 60s Cadbury milk chocolate Christmas biscuit tin, which is going for £15. A lovely wide shot of this unit here leads to this vintage Toytown telephone exchange circa 1955, complete with this box, which goes for around £15 at auction. Surprising really, as for a 1955 toy I'd have thought they'd be worth a lot more than that. I suppose it can depend on how common or rare a toy is. Some nice railway memorabilia here in this unit, starting with what looks like an original sign taken from a railway bridge, detailing traffic weight limits and bearing the name James Williams from Derby, dated 28th of April 1875. We also get to see some more modern and reproduction tin signs, another Michelin Man on the floor there, and what looks like a cast iron vintage postbox, painted blue for some reason. And I was quite enamoured with this selection on the wall here of tin signs showing various pop culture references like Superman, Dinky Toys and Guinness. I could do with picking up something like this to display in my playroom. Sorry, my studio. You can just about make out the price on the Michelin Man as well here, and they're asking 225 quid. Bit rich for my taste, if I'm honest. Lovely set of what I think might be road lamps. I seem to remember these types of lamp being out on roads and motorways while work was being done, maybe around the mid-70s. And of course another collection of assorted tin signs, probably a mix of vintage and reproduction. And panning around to the left, a smashing little table football game, accompanied by two classic milk bottles. These turn up occasionally and they always seem to trigger nostalgic memories of when we used to have the milk delivered every morning. Moving along, and we get a fairly modest collection of dusty old books, but the ones that seem to draw my attention are the annuals, which always remind me of Christmas when we used to get these as prezzies. Of particular note here, the Cub Scout Annual 1973, Tiger Annual 1978, a couple of Knockout Annuals 1977 and 85, and two Topper books. One of my favourite units, this one, always has a selection of Coca-Cola merchandise, novelty printed mirrors and assorted booze-related items. Bizarrely, on this occasion they had two plastic moulded legs of ham hanging up from the shelves, which I presume were salvaged from an old butcher's shop display. I bought a few items from here in the past, the two most interesting being a Coca-Cola cassette Walkman and a novelty Fonzie mirror. The Walkman barely works, the rubber belts have perished sadly, so I just have it as a display piece. And as you saw from the picture, Fonzie currently adorns the side of a wardrobe, so I get that little reminder that Fonzie is cool every time I walk in the room. Records, CDs and music memorabilia here, including a selection of books covering musical subjects and a handful of framed pictures, and judging from the way they've displayed the records here, I'm guessing somebody might be an Elvis fan. Round the corner, an extensive collection of character figurines, thimbles and ornaments. Not really my sort of thing, but very collectible nonetheless, and there's always the possibility that there might be one or two little items amongst all this that might fill a gap or two in a collection. On with more of the good stuff now, and this unit is mainly home to toys, dolls and die-cast models. I'll leave you to peruse this assortment of items from all sorts of eras at your leisure, as it all kind of speaks for itself. A modest little unit here, vintage postcards, and underneath the table some books and magazines, and hiding here behind the National Geographic magazines a selection of comics going for £2 each. I've picked up a few from here and used them in some of my What's Inside comic book videos. Nothing floating my boat on this occasion though. A few Dandies, Tigers and Roy of the Rovers worth mentioning, but I'm kind of overrun with old comics at the moment and they're not hard to find on eBay, so I left these for somebody else to find. £2 is a good price though. One of these on eBay is likely to set you back about £4 or £5. Lurking at the back of this next unit, below the lovely selection of old cameras, some more annuals, mainly Rupert the Bear, alongside some Enid Blyton Famous 5 books and a couple of now dodgy looking Golly books. Here's a closer look at those cameras too. Not something I collect personally, but they're always fascinating to see out on display. Another of my favourite units here, simply because they sell cassette tapes. I still have two fully working hi-fi cassette decks, one from the 80s and one from the 90s, so thankfully I can still play cassettes and get a really good sound quality from them. I'd always advise anyone looking to get back into cassettes not to bother with any of the modern machines available from new now. Buying second-hand vintage decks is the only way you're ever going to get a decent sound out of tapes now. As well as the cassettes, you can see there's a selection of vinyls and CDs to flick through as well, so there's something for every vintage music collector here in this unit, whichever format you prefer. Over on the right hand side of the market there's a small staircase leading up to more units. Most of the stuff up here is furniture, but you'll always find a few interesting curiosities in this area too. This Sankyo Super 5X Cine movie camera is going for £25, which is about the right price according to a quick eBay search. And there's some kind of magic picture frame over there with moving images on it, probably some kind of Harry Potter artefact I imagine. Deeper into this unit, next to a box of Whimseys, another great collectible that, this smashing Jupiter 13-inch giant walking robot with light-up eyes and shooting missiles. It reminds me of a similar one I had back in the 1980s. Boxed examples like this go on eBay for about £40 to £60. And beyond the Superman and Hulk wall arts, here's that magic picture frame again. Judging from the moving picture, I reckon it probably taps into your mind and displays your worst nightmares. Moving along to the next unit, we get a guest appearance from Roland Rat, some cute figurines, a slightly creepy looking clown doll, one of those old recorders that they used to force us to play at school, and up on the shelf there, tucked in beside the Action Man Jeep and trailer, who could ignore this Star Wars Millenium Falcon model. I don't think it's the big major one we all lusted after in the 1970s, but it's still a nice curiosity. And there's a closer look at that 1970s Action Man Jeep and trailer, priced at £30, which might be a bit steep as examples in this condition usually go for around about £20. I have to point out the Girls World disembodied heads up there on the back shelf of this unit, a favourite of my sister that one, designed to have makeup applied and hair styled for budding cosmetic stylists and hairdressers, and on the shelves below those a mishmash of books, calendars and LPs to browse through. At the back end of this upstairs section is what I like to call the charity shop corner, as most of this stuff is the type of thing you'd see on the shelves of a charity shop. Not necessarily a bad thing though. I had to pan round to the right here because there was someone browsing, so we'll come back to that bit. You've got a hodgepodge of crockery, books and kitchenware of varying ages. Back over in the corner we panned around from, mainly glassware, and you can generally find one or two interesting pint glasses or shot glasses if you like a nostalgic tipple or two. Heading back down the stairs now to the main section of the antique cellar. Now, as you can see from this unit in front of us that's giving off a hardware store vibe, some of the things for sale are brand new items, so you can also pick up some useful stuff here in addition to the antiques and collectibles. And speaking of hardware stores, I love the way this next unit is giving off a traditional shop counter vibe, and you'll see in a moment there's even a vintage shop till to give it that authentic open all hours feeling. Worth mentioning the telephones here as well, one with push buttons and one with an original rotary dial. Sadly these old phones don't work on the modern phone systems these days, but they're great as display pieces. There's also a fine selection of glass and glazed pottery bottles, and some vintage storage tins of varying types and sizes. I love this sort of thing. As we pan round, coming up here is that shop till that I mentioned. And she's a beauty, sadly though not for sale, and there's a sign on it asking people not to play with it. I guess this is just here to help enhance that shop counter vibe. Over in the distance there you can see a war memorabilia stall. That's something else that's not really my scene, but some people do find this stuff fascinating, and it is all highly collectible. You've got medals, ornaments, clothing and accessories, including a fair amount of period policing gear. Quite like this selection of old classic sci-fi books here. They reminded me a lot of the Pulp Fiction books we'd pick up dirt cheap for a quick read back in the day. You've got some standalone novels and a couple of short story collections, and looking at that aged paper I can almost smell those pages just looking at the screen right now. More toys in this unit, some really old stuff here but nothing I'm personally particularly interested in, although that Meccano helicopter might have been something I'd have eyed up when I was a little boy. Deeper in and there's another of those lovely printed mirrors that I like so much, and although that odd looking push button telephone doesn't know what it really wants to be, the Darth Vader head kind of redeems it. This is apparently a telephone which has a handset on the back of the head and usually comes on a plinth, although that seems to be missing here. Here's a picture of what it's supposed to look like from behind. Quick sneaky look at one particular book here, especially for you fans of Richard Briers, as I know some of you appreciate his prolific voiceovers in the adverts that appear on my Time Travel TV YouTube channel. You know who you are. For the musicians among you, a lovely selection of guitars here, which I presume you can try out as there's no sign to say otherwise. I still felt awkward about it though, so I let them be. The rest of that unit is made up of mainly cushions and soft furnishings. At this point it was coming up to midday, so we headed off down to the tea shop for a spot of tea and tiffin. On the way I decided to film an overview of the units down this aisle, so I'll leave that footage here as is to give you an idea of the size of this place. In addition to the two upstairs sections we've already seen, this is one of the three main aisles on the floor, each with adjoining avenues leading off between them at intervals. It really is a massive area to cover, and whenever we've been here in the past, we've always needed at least 2 hours, including a lunch break, to have a proper look around every unit. No tiffin as it turned out, and we decided to skip the puddings, but we did grab tea for two, as you can see here, and a couple of lunchtime snacks. I went for a sausage bap with cheese and caramelised onion, and Lainey opted for a staple favourite of hers, the jacket spud, with cheese, mixed salad and coleslaw. 10 out of 10 for the quality and portion sizes. Fully recharged now and on with the hunt. These vintage picnic baskets always draw our eye, but in reality when we've had them, we've never really properly used them, so they're just a lovely thing to look at. And behind that a box full of old cameras. Often worthless these, but some of the rarer ones can go for a pretty penny. This might interest some of you, a couple of issues of Real Robots magazine. This is one of those weekly publications that came with a different part each week, the aim being to build a complete model by the end of it. Did you ever do one of these type of magazine builds, and if so, how much did you end up paying in the end? I'd be interested to hear about that in the comments. These framed 2000 AD comic covers caught my eye, as I've been interested in Judge Dredd and 2000 AD comics since I was about 12. These are interesting, but I already have a couple of framed prints on the wall of my studio room, so I wouldn't really want to pay out for any more of these. Deep down in the recesses of this adjoining offshoot, there's what appears to be a shrine to Elvis Presley. The main attraction being this beautiful Presley-themed jukebox, which is labelled up as awaiting pat testing and servicing, so not yet for sale. There's also a popcorn machine in the corner, possibly saved from an old cinema, and without a price tag. And the Elvis Presley home bar over there in the corner is priced up at £395. Not bad for something like this, I think, if you're a Presley fan who wants to have a pub-like area in one of the rooms of your home. Another politically questionable item here with this black and white minstrel show LP and a selection of albums behind it to browse through. Again, nothing you wouldn't find in most charity shops, however there was one record that caught my attention. This vinyl recording of Little April Shower from the Bambi movie takes me right back to when I had a collection of Disney movie soundtrack LPs at the age of about 5. This particular record has been marked down from £18 to £9. I think for that price I'd probably want a whole album, not just a 12-inch single. Although I'm not particularly interested in clothing myself, some of you probably are, so I've included this unit, which is decorated with two life-size models of Marilyn Monroe and James Dean, which is always a joy to see. So especially for those of you who like to shop for vintage clothes, here's a little look around. Some more 2000 AD and Judge Dredd comics for sale here, both individually and in packs, and after a bit of research I think some of these are reprints of older strips, sold originally in the Canadian market. More comic books behind those from DC and Marvel, and beyond that, more toys, games, books and ornaments, plus one or two bonus printed mirrors, one of which piqued my interest, the Pears soap mirror near the bottom left there. I liked it, but not enough to buy it. I quite like this guitar-shaped shoulder bag, but again, not enough to buy it. And there's more of these vintage annuals that we love so much, which I couldn't resist having a flick through. The Dan Dare and Eagle annuals were a bit too recent for this old codger though. I'm more interested in the 70s and 80s stuff. And a quick flit round this unit reveals another of those lovely looking vintage picnic baskets that you'll probably never use. Dodging the porcelain figurines as we go, this hoard of old books holds a few hidden treasures. If we bypass the boring looking random selection of admittedly amazing smelling old books, we come to this. Hidden in amongst the randomness, one or two children's titles of interest, but mainly this collection of old Ladybird books. These were a pretty big part of my education as a child, both at school and at home, and there are some pretty old ones in here too. Coming up to the final stretch now, and this glass cabinet section is kind of in the middle and near the entrance, so we usually leave this till last. There's a lot of jewellery, and Elaine quite likes looking at the brooches and necklaces here, and she's made a couple of purchases from this section in the past. But the two cabinets that stand out for me are the Toby Jugs, which although I'm not a collector, still fascinate me and remind me of a specific time from my childhood history, and the cabinet with Snoopy Memorabilia from the Peanuts cartoon. These also take me back to a specific time, and there are some lovely examples of books, mugs, ornaments, money boxes, and randomly a bottle of bubble bath up there at the top. We're about to head back to the entrance, but before we leave the Brackley Antique Cellar, I'll share a quick run around some more of the cabineted section for those of you that might like to see what else they have on offer here. And actually, seeing this section again on screen now has reminded me of a boxed Sony Walkman that I missed out on a couple of years ago. It was in one of these cabinets and I just didn't take the plunge. But after looking at the value, I realised it would have been an absolute bargain. And of course, the next time we came, it was gone. That one still hurts to this day. So as we make our way to the exit now, I wonder if anything here today has sparked a childhood memory or two for you. If so, go ahead and post about it in the comments and we can have a chat about it there. And before we leave, I'd like to thank you for liking and subscribing, and of course to thank you for watching Retrospectives.
MX, a great range of tyres from Michelin. Tyres that combine even better cornering with even better braking in the wet and the long, long life you expect from Michelin. Even we've never gone so far to create better tyres. MX, even better tyres from Michelin.